June 1967. The Sinai Peninsula is a huge graveyard for men and military equipment. It is also a graveyard for dreams. Who remembers the dreams of Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, the greatest Arab leader in the 20th century? Other Arab rulers ignored their people. Nasser seemed to embody their hopes. The dream of a mighty and unified Arab nation. That idea died in just 6 days. Nasser loses his army, his air force, and his dream. 3 years later, at 52 years old, Nasser will have a heart attack. His friends say he died of a broken heart. What remains of Nasser's dream of modern and secular Arab states, free from post-colonial influences? An Arab world plagued by religious extremism and autocratic regimes. The victors of the war have their dreams too, of ancient lands and holy sites. But in the photo of the conquering generals entering Jerusalem, someone is missing. A man who fought to avoid war. Who remembers the dreams of Levi Eshkol, Israel's prime minister? He's Nasser's opposite. He's a manager. He has no charisma. He's the butt of jokes. Above all, Eshkol is a man of compromise. He tries to find a path to peace, to hold back the political hawks and the confident generals. But he fails. And not long after the war, at 74, he, like Nasser, dies of a heart attack. His wife says he too died of a broken heart. For Israel, 1967 is a military success. But it redraws the map of the Middle East and mires the region in a never-ending cycle of occupation, terrorism, and reprisal. Cairo. After midnight on the 14th of May, 1967, an official convoy speeds to the residence of the President of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser. Anwar al-Sadat, the Speaker of the National Assembly, carries a startling warning from Egypt's powerful ally, the Soviet Union. The Soviets have told Sadat that Israel is poised to invade Syria. Sadat rushes into Nasser's office with the news. He finds him there with his military commander-in-chief, Field Marshal Amer. In a region where countries are struggling to get out of poverty, Egypt is said to be the most powerful. It has a mutual defense treaty with Syria. And in fact, tensions are high these days between Israel and Syria. The Soviet warning about an Israeli attack seems believable.
ناصر أخذها كحقيقة. أخذها كحقيقة. ولذلك ابتدأ يواجه الموقف على أنه لمواجهة عدوان هيتم في سوريا ومصر نظراً للتحالفات العربية لابد أن يتحرك وإلا يبقى موقفه موقف صعب جداً أمام العرب.
Amer assures Nasser that the army is strong enough to confront Israel. The order is given. The Egyptian army is mobilized. The Egyptian army is already stretched thin because of its involvement in a guerrilla war in Yemen. they are forced to call up thousands of reservists, many of them from the densely populated Nile Delta. Thousands receive their mobilization orders. They are primarily poorly trained peasants, like Fatih Abu El-Rish.
الفلاح ده كان معدوم. عبد الناصر اداله ارض. عبد الناصر كان مع الناس الفلاحين الغلابه دي. فطبعا كنا بنحب عبد الناصر سواء رئيس جمهوريه او مش رئيس جمهوريه. كنا بنحبه.
In the first 48 hours, 3 Egyptian divisions cross into the Sinai. 45,000 soldiers, 300 state-of-the-art tanks, 450 armored personnel carriers, and masses of Soviet artillery. The television cameras are there to film it all. It seems more like a parade than a serious military advance. But it's far more serious than a parade. By deploying so much military power so close to Israel, Nasser has made a move that will have serious consequences for him and for the entire region. On the 15th of May, the Israelis hold their Independence Day military parade in Jerusalem, only a few hundred meters from the Jordanian border. Levi Eshkol, Prime Minister and Defense Minister, reviews the troops. Eshkol now knows about the Egyptian mobilization.
אני יושב ליד לוי אשכול על היציע באצטדיון. המצעד מתחיל לצעוד, והנה קצין ניגש ולוחש על אוזנו של אשכול. אשכול מרים גבה, נראה קצת מודאג.
What was behind Egypt's move? Must Israel respond to this challenge? In public, Eshkol seems unmoved. Like the rest of the country, he takes part in Independence Day festivities. His fellow citizens are unaware of the impending danger. On the advice of his chief of staff, Yitzhak Rabin, Eshkol mobilizes 1 armored division and waits for more news. 3,000 men are called up as part of Israel's well-trained reserve army. One of them, Yehoshua Bar Dayan, an Israeli reservist, starts to write a diary.
At 11 p.m. at night, a telephone rings. I have to leave in 10 minutes and help mobilize my unit. Gila is shaking. I am nervous too. It takes all night to mobilize everybody. You climb stairways, knock on doors. There are frightened faces. Husbands enter the children's room to kiss the kids, trying to calm everyone, to reassure them. At 6 a.m., I'm back at home. I kiss Gila and Yariv, who wave to me from the balcony.
Meanwhile, the Israeli Intelligence Committee meets at the Ministry of Defense. They are not inclined to see Egypt's move as a prelude to war.
וניתחנו את המצב, ואי שם סמוך לחצות של אותו לילה, הוצאנו את הנייר הראשון שמדבר על המהלך המצרי, שאותו ראינו כמהלך חד משמעי מצרי, שמטרתו לא להסלים, אלא להפך.
Gazit's analysis is that war is not imminent. But the Israeli population is already on edge. That night, as Gazit drives home, he hears the song, Jerusalem of Gold. Newly composed and very popular, its words evoke a mythical Jerusalem, an empty city waiting for its exiled sons to return. On his side, Nasser has checked Soviet intelligence and finds no Israeli troops on the Syrian border. War could have been avoided, but the Arab world has been roused by Egypt's mobilization. Nasser, the hero of the masses, doesn't want to let them down. He cannot stop what he's started.
وسبب من ضمن السبب الرئيسي لحب الشعب العربي لعبد الناصر هو القومية العربية. القومية العربية يعني أشعلت النار في قلوب العرب في كل مكان، إنهم ممكن يبقوا كعرب قوة ما وليس كأقطار مختلفة.
Nasser feels he can use this situation to increase the profile of the Arabs on the international scene.
A new Middle East crisis arises as President Nasser of Egypt tells a wildly cheering crowd in Alexandria that Egypt has seized the
For Nasser,
internationally
this
owned
is familiar
Suez Canal.
territory,
His announcement
reminiscent
touches
of the
off a rapid
Suez crisis
series
of
reprisals and
1956,
counter-reprisals.
when Nasser took a
Britain
tremendous
freezes all
gamble
Egyptian
and
funds,
nationalized
and
the
Egypt
Suez
retaliates
Canal,
with the same
the
measure.
vital waterway
France,
that
leaders of
delivers
bitter
oil to
protest,
the
discuss
West.
the biggest threat this year has posed to world peace.
In October of 1956, the Israelis, the British, and the French joined forces to recapture the canal.
The Egyptian army was defeated.
The UN stepped in, and a ceasefire was declared, and Nasser turned a military defeat into a political triumph.
Notez qu'en 56, c'est quand même une victoire. Dans la mesure où aussi bien les deux grandes puissances impériales qui ont dominé la scène politique jusqu'à la Seconde Guerre mondiale, la Grande-Bretagne et la France, ont obligé de se retirer, et bien plus, les troupes israéliennes ont obligé de se retirer aussi, et le canal de Suez a été nationalisé.
Nasser's victory was incomplete. He was forced into two major concessions: keeping a UN peacekeeping force on Egyptian soil and allowing the Straits of Tiran to stay open, even to Israelis. For 10 years, this strategic spot stayed remarkably peaceful, thanks to the UN peacekeepers. But all that is now about to change as Nasser makes his next move.
I got a phone call from Brigadier General Sharkawi, who was my Egyptian liaison officer, to say that he'd had a call from the general headquarters in Cairo.
That day, General Sharkawi brings a message from Nasser. It demands that the UN peacekeepers withdraw from their posts along the border. In case of war, Egypt says it cannot guarantee the UN's safety.
My reaction was very cool. And so I said, I will send this to the Secretary General and ask for his instructions. Then Sharkawi said, but sir, what do you think about it? So I thought very rapidly, and I said, have you thought through what the consequences of this problem are going to be? Have you worked it out, how you're going to deal with Israel after you move your troops on the frontier and UNF moves away? What response the Israelis are going to have? Oh, sir, I will meet you for lunch in Tel Aviv next.
Nasser's move puts the UN on the spot. The organization is strongly influenced by non-aligned powers and the newly independent former colonies for whom sovereignty is a sacred belief. The UN Secretary General, U Thant, goes along with Egypt's request.
These are the last pictures taken of members of the United Nations Emergency Peacekeeping Force in position on Egyptian territory at the Gaza Strip frontier with Israel. We filmed them last
A few days
Friday
later,
afternoon,
the peacekeepers
the 19th
pack
of
up.
May, the time 2 p.m.
From the other side of the border, the Israelis watch as the last of the UN forces leave. There's nothing now between the Israeli army and the Egyptian army. Moving his troops raised the stakes. But by removing the UN troops, Nasser has now moved beyond the first international restraint of 1956. And the future is uncertain. The American CIA head of station in Tel Aviv, John Haddon, reports to his superiors. Nasser has crossed the line. It could lead to war.
For me, it was just like a little boy who's being held by his father, and the little boy is shouting, "Let me at him, let me at him." And he doesn't want to be let at him at all, but all of a sudden the father lets go of him. And then they were off and running, weren't they?
רק בערב, לאחר יומיים של שתיקה בישראל, מתפרסמת במהדורת החדשות של השעה 7 תגובה
Eshkol
רשמית
is at
ראשונה.
home when he learns about the withdrawal of the UN. He worries that events may be taking on a life of their own. His military advisor, Colonel Lior, is with him. He writes in his journal.
That evening, Eshkol opened his heart to his deputy, to me, and mainly to his wife Miriam.
ופתאום ככה הסתובב וצעק, יש מלחמה, את לא מבינה?
אשכול אמר את זה.
אשכול אמר, יש מלחמה.
דובר צה"ל הודיע הערב כי בעקבות כניסת צבא מצרי רב לקדמת
Like
סיני,
Nasser, Eshkol knows that the departure of the UN has brought the region closer to war. Any military move could easily spiral out of control. With the UN gone, the Straits of Tiran are now under direct Egyptian control. Nasser is tempted to push his luck, to close the straits to Israeli ships. But Nasser is worried. Is the army ready? What if Israel attacks? Once again, Field Marshal Amer declares his troops are ready.
كتير بيقول لك المسؤول الأوحد عبد الناصر. وأنا أؤكد لو أن القيادة العسكرية قالت إنهم غير مستعدين، إنهم غير أكفاء لمواجهة الموقف، صدقني إن لم يكن عبد الناصر يجسر إنه يطور الوضع السياسي إلى ما كان عليه.
Nasser has little choice except to trust in his military, especially in Field Marshal Amer. They are old comrades in arms, seizing power together 15 years before. Their roles are fixed. Nasser takes care of politics, Amer takes care of the army. To break this pact could cause a dangerous shift in the balance of power in the country.
أنا لاعب شطرنج. كنت ألعب سياسة، ما ألعبش عسكري. كنت قادر على إن أنا ألعب سياسة، وسبق من 52 ل 67 لعبت السياسة في أمور كثيرة. إنما اللي جعلني في هذا الموضوع هو ما قاله عبد الحكيم عامر عن قدرة القوات المسلحة.
But the Egyptian military was not all it seemed to be. It was large, but ill-trained and less powerful than the Israelis.
المصيبة إنهم ما كانوش قادرين يحسبوا توازن القوى. لأن the balance of power مش كتير يقدروا يحسبوها. مش كتير. المسألة مش مسألة عددية. لا ده عشان تحسب توازن القوى دي عاوزة خبرة كبيرة جدا جدا. ليه؟ لأن 3 دبابات زي 3 دبابات مش لازم يكونوا 6.
These are critical moments for Nasser. He knows that closing the Straits of Tiran could easily provoke a war. The Straits are Israel's only southern access to the sea. Will the world allow Nasser to close the Straits? Will it be a repeat of the Suez crisis? He makes a decision, one that will be fateful for him and for Egypt. Speaking to a group of pilots, Nasser makes his announcement. He will close the Straits of Tiran. Nasser is accompanied by Amir, as if telling the world that he has confidence in his army. Nasser declares, if the Jews want war, we welcome them. Eshkol's military advisor, Colonel Lior, is awakened at 2:30 a.m. with the news of the closing of the Straits.
I sat in bed, the blood gushing in my temples. I knew it was irreversible. Israel was going to war. I was asked to come down to the pit. I thought war was going to break out that same day. We cannot give the Egyptian army more time to organize. I woke up Eshkol on the direct line. Sir, the Egyptians have closed the straits.
At 8 in the morning, Eshkol meets with his generals, including his chief of staff, Itzhak Rabin, and the head of intelligence, Aharon Yariv. They tell him Israel must respond with force in order to maintain the balance of power in the region. Rabin recommends going to war immediately. Eshkol listens to the generals, but asks a simple question. Are the straits really blocked? An oil tanker is expected to arrive at the straits soon. If the Egyptians block it, it could be the reason to go to war. For the military, however, it doesn't really matter whether the straits are actually blocked. It's the symbolism that counts.
It was announced that it was closed. And for the Israelis to pull back with that happening, you can't do it. You can't, then you've been, in effect, you've been defeated, haven't you?
What's now going to happen, Mr. President? Do you think the Israelis are going to attack the Arabs?
Well, we are waiting for them. We left for them the initiative completely. We are waiting for them.
In Israel, the question worrying the generals is whether failing to respond to Nasser will make Israel appear weak.
It's not just the freedom of navigation that is hanging in the balance. Israel's credibility, determination, and capacity to exercise its right of self-defense are also being tested.
After a long and tense meeting, the government decides to delay any decision on war for 48 hours. Israel's foreign minister, Abba Eban, is dispatched on a lightning trip to Europe and North America. The hope? Israel's allies will force Egypt to step down and reopen the straits. In Egypt, the state radio is mobilized to push the government's policy on Israel.
صوت العرب كان يزيد على أنه بيخاطب الجماهير العربية لتحاول أن تكون مع مصر عندما يحدث أي قتال. الجماهير كانت متحمسة جدا وكانت واثقة من أن قواتها المسلحة تستطيع أن تنتصر. حتى إحنا كنا في الميديا أيضا
من الواضح أن عبد الناصر كان هو القوة الروحية لمنظور عربي جدا متقدم في ذلك الزمن. يعني كان العربي من المحيط للخليج الموديل النهائي للشخصية التاريخية المنتظرة هو عبد الناصر.
أبناء الشعب العربي هم السبب فيما حدث في حرب.
فبالتالي صحيح كثير من الناس كانوا يقولوا بأنه هذا بلا بلا بلا، بس بالحقيقة العالم العربي كليته كان ماشي معه. يعني العالم العربي كان مستعد فعليا يضحي بنفسه في سبيل مشروع ينجح.
No one wanted Nasser's project more than the Palestinians. Since 1948, when the State of Israel was born, most of them had been living as refugees in Jordan and the Gaza Strip.
Case of the Arabs of Palestine. You know, here in this part of the world, in the Arab country, no one accepts this idea about forgetting all the past, all the 20 years, and close our eyes and leave everything as it is. We insist about the rights of the Arabs of Palestine.
In 1967, Nasser raises the hopes of Palestinians that they can return to their homes and farms.
The people were very, they were looking towards Abdel Nasser. If you took a popularity poll, there were probably more Palestinians supported Nasser than Egyptians. You know, I mean, he was an incredible hero. I remember seeing his face on prayer rugs. I was shocked by that. What are you doing with the face of Abdel Nasser on a prayer rug? I mean, he was such an extraordinary hero, as if he could do no wrong.
By May of 1967, the look and feel of the street in Cairo is changing. And so is Egyptian radio and television. It's still used to rouse the masses, but it is also being aimed at Israel. Egyptian radio has started to broadcast in Hebrew.
ناصر ناصر نحن أحريقة نشميد إتخم نصرف إتخم نشحك إتخم عدة.
This propaganda is having an effect in Israel. In fact, with no Israeli television network, even Arabic television shows from Egypt are being closely watched.
פותח, אתה רואה את שידורי הטלוויזיה המצרית, אתה רואה את החגיגות ברחובות, אתה רואה את נאסר יושב בביר גפגפה עם הנשרים הצעירים, טייסי המיג 21, כולם בחליפות ג'ים, מוכנים לצאת לקרב, מחייכים מאוזן עד אוזן. ראית את המסות של טנקים נכנסות לסיני.
Egyptian editorial cartoons are being reprinted in Israel. They also frighten Israelis with their fantasies of Israel crushed, pierced, and destroyed in a coming war. Israelis prepare for the worst. Rabbis consecrate parks to serve as mass graveyards. People are called to donate blood, then dig trenches. By now, most of the army has been mobilized.
אני זוכרת שמאוד חששתי לצאת מהבית. הרחובות היו כמעט ריקים, זה היה כמו לנסוע בעיר רפאים. אני זוכרת שאני ככה בליבי אמרתי, אם אני אדע שנכבשנו, משהו כזה, אני אפתח את הגז. ונמות כולנו יחד. אני לא אתן לילדים שלי שיפגעו, וגם אני לא רוצה ליפול בידיים שלהם, וזהו, נעשה משהו כזה.
הפגנות אהדה והזדהות עם ישראל במאבקה נערכו ברבות מערי מערב אירופה. בהולנד הפגינו אלפים לנוכח קונסוליית ישראל.
The Arab propaganda has a deep impact beyond Israel. For many around the world, it ignites a fear that another Holocaust is in the making.
وإسرائيل استفادت من الجانب الأول من الخطاب، يعني الجانب الجماهيري، لتقول للعالم ولأوروبا بشكل خاص وللغرب إن العرب يريدون أن يلقوا بنا في البحر. ومن سوء الحظ أن بعض قادتنا يعني قالوا هذا الكلام، ولكن نحن لا في ذلك الوقت أنا لم أكن أصدق بهذا الكلام. وإسرائيل يعني استغلت هذه الفرصة لتنقل هذه الصورة إلى الصحف الأوروبية ووسائل الإعلام الأوروبية التي أعادت نوعا ما مسألة الهولوكوست.
Young Jewish volunteers pour into Israel.
I'm just going there because I feel, the need to go there at this particular time.
What are you going to do when you get out there? Whatever they ask me to do.
I feel that I identify strongly with Israel, and I feel that they need me perhaps now more than they will next year.
הייתה מין תחושה של ערב משהו, זאת אומרת, הרגשה הייתה כל רגע יקרה משהו. זאת אומרת, אין כבר זמן, הדברים כבר עומדים על הקצה, משהו הולך להתפוצץ.
But if Egyptian propaganda is frightening both Israelis and Jews around the world, it's not having the same effect on Israel's military command. Unlike the Israeli public, they are quite confident. Their private assessment: Israel is much stronger than its enemies. It's an opinion that the military keeps to itself.
אצלנו, במערכת הצבאית, הייתה לנו תמונה מאוד מאוד מציאותית של הערכת יחסי הכוחות הצבאיים. לא היה לנו שום פקפוקים, שום ספקות בנושא הזה, ביטחון מוחלט במה שהולך לקרות, ואיש לא העלה אפילו בחלום הכי שחור שלו איזושהי סכנה קיומית.
Eshkol is caught in a dilemma. As defense minister, he knows that his army has little to fear from the Arab forces. But as the prime minister, he has to deal with a population that's growing more frantic every day.
אתה חש שמתחילה איזו תסיסה שמתחילה להיות מכוונת נגד אשכול ונגד הדרך שהוא מושך ומושך ומושך עוד יום, ומתחילה להיות איזו מין שאלה, תנו לנו גנרל, תנו לנו מנהיג צבאי.
The papers ridicule Eshkol. He is portrayed as an indecisive leader, crushed by his enemies while he sleeps. Colonel Lior writes,
"These were very tough hours and days for Eshkol. Even his best friends from his own party demand he give up the defense ministry. He does not understand why. What had he done? He knows no one can blame him for putting the country in danger. Pressure is mounting. He is more and more isolated."
Meanwhile, in Cairo, Nasser is also under increasing pressure. On the 23rd of May, Entente comes for last-minute negotiations, hoping to avert war. After a day of meetings, Outant and UN Forces Commander General Riquet fail to move Nasser. But they gain a rare insight into his predicament. After the press photos, Nasser invites the men to a private dinner. They are the last foreigners to speak with him before the war.
I think the main points that really came out of it was, one, that he was under tremendous political pressure. He said that the military are insisting that he go to war. Can't remember exact words, I'm sorry, but he definitely indicated that he was afraid of a coup, assassination. I think this was also in his mind.
Nasser is now at a precipice. The Arab world is behind an invasion of Israel, and his military is clamoring for war, to strike the first blow. But Nasser hesitates. What will the Soviets do if he starts a war? Nasser decides to send his Minister of Defense, Shams Badran, to Moscow to test the waters. Will the Soviets support Egypt? If they say no, then Nasser has a good argument for waiting. According to the diplomat, Pavel Akopov, Badran gets his response from Soviet Premier Kosygin in no uncertain terms.
Не можем дать вам согласие на то, чтобы вы нанесли превентивный удар по Израилю и тем самым начать военные действия. Во-первых, если вы нанесете превентивный удар, начнете первым военным, вы будете агрессором. Это противоречит нашей политике, и мы не можем поддержать агрессора.
As Nasser turns to Moscow, Eshkol turns to Washington. Foreign Minister Abba Eban meets with an American president already embroiled in the war in Vietnam. But will Johnson send ships to force open the Straits of Tiran?
He expressed to me a sense of his own impotence that I had never heard either before or since from an American leader. He said that he was actually contained and frustrated by the Vietnam War. He said, I will not be able to carry out what was then his policy of forcing the Straits with American power. And he then said in a kind of Delphic oratory sort of mood, Israel will not be alone unless it decides to be alone.
עיתונאים וצלמים רבים ציפו בנמל התעופה לוד לשר החוץ מר אבא אבן בשובו משיחותיו עם ראש ממשלת...
Johnson's words aren't much help to Eshkol in his debates with the generals. Eshkol is now running out of options. Johnson has put the onus on the Israelis. The dilemma is always the same. Should there be a preemptive strike or not? Eshkol's cabinet votes. Half are for war, half against. Meanwhile, outside his windows, there are demonstrations demanding that he be replaced as defense minister by Moshe Dayan, a general.
מסביב לרחוב הירקון 110. הבו לנו את דיין, הבו לנו את דיין, הבו לנו את דיין. וזה נעשה במדרכה ליד רחוב הירקון 110, ששם יושבת לשכת המפלגה, ואנחנו שומעים את הצעקות האלה.
The question of letting Dayan into the government dominates the political agenda of the country. Having General Moshe Dayan, the hero of the Suez conflict of 1956, as defense minister, seems to a frightened Israeli public to be the only answer.
אני מוכרח לומר, אנחנו ניסינו להגן על אשכול, אבל הייתה איזו נקודת אל חזור.
Eshkol has one last chance to calm the public's fear and to keep the defense portfolio. He will go on radio and address the nation. His first public speech since the crisis began.
הבאנו אותו לאולפן, הכנסתי אותו, עשיתי איתו 2 חזרות. בשתי החזרות הוא היה מצוין. ממש קרא את הטקסט באופן בהיר, נהיר, אין כמוהו. היה יוצא מן הכלל טוב.
על השולחן כזה היה, ישב חגי, ישב אשכול, וישב ראש לשכתו של אשכול, עדי יפה.
And then it was time to go on air.
הממשלה קבעה הנחיות להמשך הפעילות המדינית בזירה העולמית.
אשכול קרא את הטקסט בשידור חי יוצא מן הכלל טוב, עד שהגיע אל מילה אחת מאוד מאוד פשוטה, להשגת הכוחות המצריים. כאן הוא הפסיק, פנה לאחור ושאל, עדי, מה זה להשגת? אמר לו, אשכול, אתה בשידור חי, סגרתי את המיקרופון. אז הוא חזר אל זה, ואז יצא גמגום, גפונן את המקום, והמשיך לקרוא. זה היה הברוך הגדול.
ומהגמגום הזה אין לך מושג, בתולדות המין האנושי לא הצליחו להפוך גמגום כזה לשערורייה לאומית מן המדרגה הראשונה.
It is a horrible broadcast, writes Colonel Lior.
Eshkol, with his stuttering, conveyed more insecurity and confusion. I heard that soldiers at the front burst out crying. Eshkol's opposition exploits this as much as it can.
And the night isn't over. Eshkol has to face his military command and explain himself. Lior calls it the night of the generals.
It is night, but in the war room, even the day is night. The neon tubes show the generals in this ugly light.
The generals declare that Israel is losing its power to deter its enemies. The country must answer Nasser's threat. Eshkol responds. And with his back to the wall, he speaks more strongly than he's ever done. Since when does Israel make preemptive strikes? I do not accept the argument that just because a large Egyptian army is sitting in the Sinai, that we have to go to war. Deterrence does not mean that you always have to act. How long will we live by our swords? You asked for more weapons, you got them. You asked for 100 planes, you got them. You asked for tanks, you got them. But you did not get them, so that one day we can say, now we can destroy the Egyptian army.
בעצם היה מעין פוטש שקט של המטכ"ל. בסופו של דבר היה ברור שאשכול איננו במצב כזה שהוא מסוגל לעמוד נגד כולם. ולעמוד נגד הצבא זה דבר מסובך עד היום. בימים ההם זה היה דבר כמעט בלתי אפשרי. מה זאת אומרת? הצבא העצום והגדול והנורא והקדוש אומר שאין ברירה אלא לצאת למלחמה, ואשכול הגמגמן הזה, הוא רוצה לספר לצבא מה טוב ומה צריך, ואם מלחמה היא כן הכרחית או לא הכרחית, לא היה לו סיכוי.
move that takes everyone by surprise, Jordan's King Hussein invites himself to Cairo to meet with Nasser. The two men haven't spoken in years. For Nasser, Hussein is little more than a comic opera figure, a puppet of the English and the Americans. Just a few days earlier, Hussein had said to Western diplomats that Nasser's closing of the Straits of Tiran was insane, that it would end badly for the Arabs, that they were not ready to fight Israel. But here he is, in Cairo, ready to join in with Nasser.
أعتقد أنه جلالة المغفور له كان عنده شعور أنه إسرائيل تحضر إلى حرب، وأن الحرب ستقع نتيجة استغلال إسرائيل للظروف التي ذكرت، وكان عنده قناعة أنه هدف إسرائيل الرئيسي هو الضفة الغربية والقدس.
For King Hussein felt that to defend the West Bank, he needed Arab support. That Arab support wouldn't be forthcoming unless he mended his fences with Nasser, who was, of course, perceived by the Arab masses as leader of the Arabs.
Hussein has joined Nasser for two reasons. He feels he's protected Jordan from an Israeli invasion, and he's gotten in tune with his population, more than half of whom are Palestinians. It's Hussein himself who suggests to Nasser that his forces be commanded by an Egyptian general. I conquered Jordan without sending a single soldier, Nasser said to the Soviet ambassador.
عبد الناصر الحقيقة يعني فوجئ هذا القدر من التحمس والاندفاع من حسين. ما كانش يتصور إلى هذا القدر يعني. ولذلك لم ينسى له ذلك حتى مات عبد الناصر.
Israel now faces enemies on three fronts: Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. In the wings are both Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Israel is virtually surrounded. In just 2 weeks, Nasser had reversed the concessions he had made in 1956. The Arab nation was on the move, and millions of Arabs were behind Nasser. In Tel Aviv, Eshkol finally breaks down and agrees to give up the defense portfolio. Moshe Dayan becomes the Minister of Defense of a new government of national unity, which will manage the war.
One thing about the significance of this appointment is immediately clear. It's an outright victory for all those in Israel who favor the taking of a much tougher line against Egypt. Well, does General Dayan's appointment mean that Israel is now about to commit herself to war at all costs?
I should think that just now it's well, let's put it like that. It's too late and too early. Too late to react right away on the blockading of the state of Eilat, and too early to draw any conclusion of the diplomatic management or way of handling the matter.
Eshkol attends a crucial cabinet meeting. Will the country go to war or not? Dayan sets the tone. We cannot lose the initiative. The situation is getting more complex, he says. It won't matter that we shoot first, we have to act, and act as quickly as possible. The cabinet votes. 12 are in favor of war, and 2 are against. Dayan proposes the official text of the decision. The government agrees to act militarily in a way that will relieve Israel from its encirclement. The government leaves to the defense minister and the prime minister the timing of the attack. This is it, writes Lior. The decision cannot be undone.
I lay in bed reconstructing what had happened since we were on the balcony of the Prime Minister's office on the eve of Independence Day. I also thought about Levi Eshkol. In 3 weeks, he had withstood unimaginable pressures from home and abroad. He had suffered an incredible injustice. But at that hour of the night, there was no room for sentiment. At 6 a.m., the phone rings. It's the wake-up call I had ordered from the war room. For me, this call is the beginning. It is a sunny summer morning, but in 1 hour, a war will break out.